Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back on another video from How on Beat, which I nearly forgot to do a reaction to until Fiery Meltman left a comment on one of my Devil Artemis reactions, reminding me. So, cool, thank you for that, because I was writing my lists and I nearly forgot, so thank you, Fiery Meltman, for reminding me. So yeah, this is Dio, Fate, and Heaven. This is like a villain analysis video, which I think is going to be cool because Dio is so cool. And even after what happens to him at part 3, he's still quite relevant throughout 4 and 5 and 6. So his legacy still goes on. And his plan is still continued after the fact. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. This is really cool. Let's get into it. Huzzah! How on beat?
She's up there. How on the beat?
I gotta say as well, the music references videos, the more updated ones recently, are boss, the class. I love that he's, expanding how he does the videos. Great.
Out of the entire JoJo series, there isn't a single character with a larger presence than Dio Brando. He has served as the main antagonist in 2 of the series' parts, and his influence extends across the entire story of JoJo's original continuity.
Yeah.
Dio is undoubtedly one of the most recognizable characters in JoJo, and just his influence even spreads to people that have never encountered the series before. I would honestly consider Dio to have an easy chance at being the single greatest character Hirohiko Araki has ever created, and I think he is the one that most embodies Araki's writing philosophy and the main themes of the story he wrote.
Sick.
However, while he may be iconic, I also think that Dio is one of the series' most misunderstood characters, even by ardent fans of JoJo. One of the most common points I've seen laid out is that Dio's personality and demeanor were inconsistent, moving from parts 1 to 3 and through his depiction in flashbacks in part 6.
I think it kind of makes sense as he progresses. Like, he starts to get power, he starts to feel like his influence starts there. It's gonna, he had that festering, and then he got it, and the power, I feel like, no, I think it makes sense.
I couldn't disagree more, and I think Dio is one of Araki's most well-written and fully realized characters. I want to take a closer look at Dio and hopefully find out who he really is. I'd like to know what he thinks of himself and others, what his philosophy on life is, and what his ultimate goals in the series really are. These are the questions I want to try and answer, and they're the ones that I think define who Dio is and help us understand him more as a character, as well as the series as a whole.
I'm gonna be a vampire now, JoJo.
To understand Dio, I think we first need to look at his creation. Araki himself has said that he considers Dio to be the true protagonist of Phantom Blood, and that he feels as if the story was created just to portray him. After all, if we look at the original manga, Dio was actually introduced before the protagonist Jonathan, and in
Oh, right, okay.
the story's early stages shares an equal amount of screen time with them.
Wow.
Araki said that he considers Dio to be an evolution of a previous character he created, the main character of his manga, Cool Shock BT. Much like Phantom Blood, BT had a sort of dual protagonist structure, with the relatable and innocent character Koichi, and the clever and enigmatic BT. Araki has said that BT and Dio both represent the dark side of humanity's jealousy and hungry spirit.
Right.
Of course, BT was not what you would consider an evil character, but that's precisely why Dio is an evolution of him. He takes BT's traits to another level.
Like, expands and exaggerates it slightly. Cool.
BT is notably named after another mangaka, Buichi Terasawa, creator of the sci-fi manga Cobra. Terasawa is deeply connected to Araki's history as an artist. He was the one who read the manuscript for Araki's debut one-shot, Poker Under Arms, and submitted it to the Tezuka Awards. And while no winner was selected, Araki's Alone was chosen as a runner-up, having drawn the attention of the judges and starting his manga career. Terasawa has noted that Araki had a particular talent for storytelling, writing only when he has a complete grasp of the dynamics of his characters and understands their outlook on the world. It's notable that Araki would use a character partially based on this early supporter of his to eventually serve as the basis of Dio.
Interesting way that they've done the space here. I don't know why that's played on my head, but like, my focus, these arrows aren't helping me focus on him at all. I think if it was more central, that just weirded me out. Don't know why that's the point I'm pointing out.
And I think it's pretty remarkable that Terusawa's take on Araki's writing style ultimately ended up best expressed through this one character. Dio was created to embody the ultimate evil of the story, in contrast to Jonathan's purity. But at the same time, Araki wanted to make Dio a character that readers could sympathize with or even admire. Araki has said that he succeeded at this to such a degree that writing Dio eventually led to him having the same dark thoughts as Dio.
Oh, that's a bit weird.
Just his presence in the story is magnetic in that way. In his JoJonium Volume 3 interview, Araki wrote about creating Dio, and said that the main idea he wanted to explore with him was how far a man's ambition can drive him when taken to its extreme. As I mentioned before, Dio makes his debut before Jonathan, and we almost see the story from his perspective.
That's crazy.
We see his life living as a child dealing with poverty and abuse. After the death of his mother, seemingly the only person to genuinely care for him, he was left at the beck and call of his abusive criminal father.
Yeah, and he's an absolute bellend, wasn't he?
Who had worked his own wife to death. But despite this, Dio is shown to be almost naturally above it all.
Bits on his grave, man. Like, what the fuck?
He's intelligent and composed and seems driven forward by endless ambition. In contrast, Jonathan's life almost could not be any better. He is part of a wealthy family and has the love of a caring father. Despite this, Jonathan is actually a lot more naive compared to Dio. Dio's poor upbringing was the very thing that created his feeling of superiority toward others. The tricky thing about that is that in many ways, Dio is superior to those around him. That's the part of Dio that we can admire, that he really is just as smart and resilient as he appears.
He very much is,
and it's that bit of truth in his character that makes his downfall more tragic. Dio has the capacity for good, and has been shown to have some amount of honor, but his evil actions far outweigh those, and Dio claiming to have any kind of moral boundaries can only come off as hypocrisy in the face of everything else he does. His actual good traits that helped him survive in a hostile world feed into his negative ones, and he becomes engulfed in endless ambition to become better at everyone else's expense. And it's that obsession with superiority that pushes Dio forward until it reaches its inevitable conclusion.
Yeah, oh my god.
Dio's complete rejection of humanity. The scene where Dio chose to throw everything away for power is maybe his most defining moment. Vampires as a subject in fiction have always been steeped in allegory. They're often used to tell stories about what it means to be human, and to represent the inhuman acts that some humans commit. This idea is so fundamental to JoJo that it is the first thing we are ever shown in the story, before any named characters. We see part of the stone mask's history during its use in Mexico, with the idea that Aztec sacrifices were really used to fuel the mask.
Damn.
It tells us that the Aztecs were known as the people of the sun. Ironically, their use of the stone mask and rejection of humanity would turn them into nocturnal vampires, eventually leading to their destruction and vanishing from history. When Araki was asked to describe JoJo with just one theme, he said that it is a celebration of humanity. From that we can see that the story's initial main foes, and its largest villain being someone who has rejected humanity, is very intentional. A vampire is someone that has rejected their humanity, and so in a meta sense, they are rejecting the main theme that controls the shape of the story. A vampire is also a being that must kill others to survive, often turning them into their own undead minions. The vampire is really a kind of embodiment of human suffering. It can't just simply live in solitude. Just to continue existing, it must cause pain for others. Not only are they a rejection of humanity, their role is necessarily an active force against them. In a lot of ways, Dio's real goal in Phantom Blood is to have the life that Jonathan has.
Well, yeah, that's what I was. It's like, I want this, but I'm weird about it.
His initial motivation in the manga is to take Jonathan's place as the heir of the Joestar family, and eventually is willing to kill him to do so.
Yeah, and like, he's poisoning the dad as well, slowly and everything. It's like,
His hatred for Jonathan comes from his jealousy, and that stems from some twisted form of admiration for Jonathan.
And the way he just, like, gets that point, it's like, right, I'm going to keep it to myself, and then I'll eventually get my goal. I'll play the long game. I'll pretend to be best friends with him.
First for the life that Jonathan gets to live, and eventually for his life itself. Dio aspires to become like Jonathan, first to assume his role in the family, and even to intervene in his love life, and later still to end Jonathan's life in a staged accident. Dio eventually realized that their lives had been intertwined by fate. Without Jonathan, Dio would have never obtained the power of the Stone Mask, but because of Jonathan, he can't rise any higher. The two exist in perfect balance, and so Dio believed that the two of them were one. Here too, though, Dio's wish to fill the role of Jonathan is pushed to its inevitable conclusion of Dio wanting to literally become Jonathan through the acquisition of his body, no longer just taking the life
Oh yeah, he does get that, doesn't he?
if Jonathan had, but also reclaiming Jonathan's humanity that he himself rejected. And of course, he ends up succeeding in this, effectively taking Jonathan's place in his own family tree and sharing a psychic connection to his descendants. He later even gains control over Jonathan's stand, the literal manifestation of his rival's fighting spirit. After Dio's nearly 100 years spent in the coffin, he became even more detached from his humanity. You could only
Well, yeah, if you spend that far away from people, or what are you thinking that whole time? That's gonna just stay with you.
wonder what actually went on in his head during this time, and how that would shape his own outlook on life afterwards.
100 years.
First and foremost, he probably wondered how and why his life had progressed to that point, and he may have reached the conclusion that, like everything else before it, it was simply inevitable. After his re-emergence, either through his own introspection or with his interactions with the fortune-teller Enya, Dio became aware of the inevitability of fate. The inevitability of these things is our most important takeaway here.
Fate's a huge thing with Dio.
That Dio as a character has an intimate bond with the idea of fate. Fate, or the idea that all things in the world are predestined, may be the single most important idea to understand when it comes to Dio's character. Araki himself is also heavily influenced by the concept of fate, and he has built his entire writing philosophy around it.
Heaven's plan and
in
everything.
his book, Manga in Theory and Practice,
I see this every time I go into either Forbidden Planet, Worlds Apart, or a Waterstones. I get very tempted to buy it sometimes.
Araki talks about what he calls the Golden Road. This is a narrative style with strong and determined characters that are constantly pushed forward to their end goal. Araki has also repeatedly described his own writing process in that same way, as if he is being compelled forward by some force to continue the story. Araki has said that when creating a character, the most complicated part to think of is their birth, and after that, the rest is simply inevitable. You could conceive of a character having free will, but if their objective has already been decided, do they really? The only possible outcome is for the story to progress in the only way that it could. This writing style materializes in the actual world of JoJo through its system of fate. Fate obviously plays an important role in the series, of course, due to the fact that all actions are governed by it.
Golden Wind really pushes the whole fate thing, like, really pushes it. Like, at the end with the ball and what's his name? I'm terrible with names, but then the ball thing, like, shows the three, and it's like, before everything started, it's like, oh, that was going to happen anyway.
Fate in JoJo is described as a kind of gravity, and may in fact be a result of the properties of the law of gravity itself. This is an extension of the very old idea that destiny is tied to the movements of stars and other celestial bodies. It would make sense that large changes in gravity could have a kind of butterfly effect with things on a smaller scale. One of the most notable things about Fate in JoJo, however, is the way that it connects people together.
Yeah, so like they do the whole thing with like everyone with stands are drawn to each other is because like it's the gravity that's bringing each other. It's like they're fated to meet.
All mass has gravity. Each person has their own personal gravity, pulling others towards them. We have seen some examples of this throughout the series. For instance, one example in Part 4, that a person's own physical charisma is a factor that can influence fate. Dio himself is described as a person with great charisma and has the power to sway people with his presence alone. Dio's own physical beauty and presence has the power to draw countless allies to his side, another thing that ties Dio to the classic idea of a vampire. Part 4 also tells us about the way that fate draws stand users together through these psychic bonds. In Part 6, we see Dio speak about the belief in gravity, that people are destined to meet each other. Dio traveled the world to meet as many people as he could to study this idea, to understand the forces that control the world and the same force that led his life to the place it was. Dio became obsessed with this concept and began to build his own philosophy surrounding the idea of heaven. Dio's main goal in the series is to attain what he calls heaven. Part 6 describes this to us through Dio's diary and the actions of his successor, Enrico Pucci. Heaven is a state of being where one is completely aware of their own fate.
They know what's going to happen, but they accept it.
In the world that Dio envisions, people will know everything that will ever happen to them before it happens. People attain heaven when they completely accept their fate and become content with their own outcome, good or bad. Perhaps Dio based this idea on events from his own troubled past, like the death of his mother and his likely traumatic experience in the coffin. If he had known about them and completely accepted them
Oh god, he'd be able to deal with it better.
beforehand, then he could have avoided the pain that came from experiencing them. The ritual Dio devised to obtain heaven is a long and complicated one, which I actually have gotten into in a full video.
Great video. Check it out, The Heaven Plan. It's really good.
But I do think it's worth bringing up here. Dio's plan...
But don't watch it if you haven't seen part 6.
and required
like, literally, if you've seen part 1 to 6, it's fine. That's why I was like, yeah.
Destruction of his own stand and its evolution into a new one that could alter the world in a way to bring about heaven. The stand ability that Dio had obtained after his return was the world, with the ability to stop time. With this power, Dio is nearly unstoppable, so it is telling that he was not even satisfied with just this. Dio started by carving 14 phrases into his stand. By doing this, Dio literally shaped his own stand with his will to obtain heaven. Dio also understood the power that souls, especially those of evil people, could wield. The stone mask draws out an evil heart from the people who wear it, and simultaneously gives them immense power. Harnessing this power by having his stand absorb the souls upon its destruction will turn it into something new. Part 6 tells us that the forces of time and gravity are connected. This is true in reality as well, where time passes more slowly wherever gravity is stronger. In that way, we could also view the world as a stand with some control over gravity. As we also know, gravity is the force behind fate in the JoJo world. By controlling gravity, a person can also manipulate fate. After obtaining an evolved stand with greater control of gravity and manipulating gravity under the proper conditions, Dio planned to accelerate time in such a way that people would be unaffected as the world changed around them, until they are eventually placed into
such a mad concept. It's so crazy. I love this. It's like, what?
A new version of the same world, where they would become aware of their own futures in a new universe, with him as its creator. This philosophy of Dio that we saw fully develop in Part 6 is the source of a lot of the misunderstandings when it comes to Dio's character. One of these is the idea that Dio's more subdued and philosophical personality in Part 6 contradicts his lust for power that we saw in Parts 1 and 3.
No.
On the contrary, I think this actually shows an interesting duality in Dio's character.
It's a bit of an evolution, I think.
And despite what people claim, glimpses into Dio's philosophical nature have existed in all of his portrayals. In Part 3, we repeatedly see Dio adopt a more calm personality, often when speaking alone or to
Oh yeah, he's very chill. He's just like, he's very casual, like, yeah, you approach me.
people that he trusts. A prime example of this would be in a scene from right at the beginning of his full debut, his conversation with Polnareff on the stairs. Here, Dio tries to persuade Polnareff to join him again, and speaks about the concept of peace of mind. He says that the reason people try to survive is because they desire this peace of mind, and that all relationships and conflicts between people just exist in an attempt to reach and sustain it. He tells Polnareff that by serving him, he can easily obtain this peace of mind, instead of living with the uncertainty of whether he would live opposing him. With what I've discussed already, I'm sure you can see that Dio is directly laying out his heaven philosophy here.
Yeah, he's like, would you not rather know what's going to happen to you and then just be happy with that?
The peace of mind gained from being completely secure in one's life and not having anything uncertain in one's future.
Yes.
The other misconception when it comes to Dio's heaven philosophy is the idea that heaven is a good thing and that Dio is helping humanity by attaining it. I think this confusion again stems from unnecessarily separating Part 3 and Part 6 Dio's portrayals, when they are really two inseparable parts of the character. Dio is still Dio, and his goals are not benevolent. Dio's ambition to rise above others continued to reach greater heights, and progressed beyond just simply intimidating people to serve under him. As Araki said, Dio is a character meant to show ambition taken to an extreme. After becoming obsessed with the forces of fate that controlled people's lives, Dio planned to use them to benefit himself. With all people under the effects of heaven, they would not only have to live beneath him, but be forced to become completely content with that outcome. What some people seem to forget is that Dio had no intention of losing at the end of Part 3. This confusion stems from the heaven plan laid out in Dio's diary where it is said that Dio's stand must be destroyed to allow its evolution into the stand to bring about heaven. However, Dio planned to do this ritual on his own terms later on, when the souls were prepared to be absorbed by his stand and give him the power to create heaven.
It was just kind of lucky, well, it was quite fateful, that he mentioned to Pucci, about the plan.
Obviously, though, that isn't what happened, and Dio's defeat in Egypt delayed the plan until Pucci could revive it using his own stand later on. Before that, Dio fully expected that he would defeat the Joestars and overcome them as the final obstacle fate would throw at him before his real ascension could begin. In a way, you can see that same desire to become Jonathan be expanded on, defeating the Joestars by becoming a Joestar, proving in an all-encompassing way that he is superior to them. Even with the way his character would evolve far into the future, it still ends up relating back to the original conflict in JoJo. That between Dio and Jonathan, and between humanity and that which is no longer human. The contrast between the two still serves as the perfect way to illustrate why Dio became the way he did. As someone raised in a harsh life, Dio couldn't afford to take anything for granted. In contrast, Jonathan had a great life that he did seem to take for granted.
Yeah, he did, but then it kind of switched, didn't it?
In that way, they sort of mirror each other, and as it often does in JoJo, it relates to the idea of yin and yang. Two positive and negative forces in opposition, but also in balance, and each containing a piece of the other. That bit of light inside of Dio that takes the form of his admirable qualities has always been the most interesting part of the character to me. Things like his resilience in life, his sense of honor, and the ability to rally people around him. Because of these, you can't help but wonder how his path could have changed if things were a bit different. Well, we don't have to wonder too much, since in many ways we actually do see this in the story of his son, Giorno Giovanna. The story of Part 5 is essential to understanding the life of Dio, both in how it could have gone differently, and also in making us truly understand Dio's relation to the series' main theme.
That is interesting. So what if, Dio did it differently? Never really thought about that about Giorno, but yeah.
Born from Dio with Jonathan's body and a Japanese woman, Giorno's life turns out to be very similar to Dio's. He also faced hardship and abuse at a young age like his father, and he is also a ruthlessly ambitious character with some shades of darkness.
But he ends up being a very, very nice guy.
He also differs from Dio in key ways. Looking back on Part 5, Araki said that the main idea he wished to tackle was how people act in the face of their own destiny. All of the major characters of Part 5 are shown to be born into tragic lives.
Yes.
And even after that, they still end up facing the possibility of more sorrow in the future.
They're all... Oh, God. They all struggle so much. Oh, God. Even... Oh, what's his name with the... No, I'm not even going to go into it. I'm not even going to mention it. The abuse.
You can't just simply change fate, or it wouldn't really be fate at all. In Part 5, we are told the real answer to this question, and the key thing that differentiates Giorno from Dio. You don't try to change fate. The real answer is to never abandon your sense of righteousness, and to never stop believing that happiness dwells in the hearts of justice. This is the idea that pushed Giorno to become a force for good instead of following the path that Dio had.
Yeah.
He is shown, like the other Joestars, to hold on to a strong sense of justice, and never stops walking the golden path. It really does go back to the idea of the golden path laid out by Araki. The story is pushed forward by a golden path that forms on its own, all stemming from the one idea at the path's inception, that being the main theme of the story. This path manifests itself in the story as the ideas of fate and good fortune. Those that adhere to the path laid out by the theme are simultaneously walking the golden path of fate in the universe of JoJo. As Giorno himself puts it, righteous actions born of reality will never be annihilated. The reality he mentions here is fate, the actions that all people do. Fate naturally creates these righteous actions, and even if the people that do them are gone, their actions still existed and caused fate to move in a righteous direction.
The actions remain.
This is echoed by the words of Emporio at the end of Part 6.
Yeah.
Walking the path of justice is true fate. And
That's
no
sick.
matter what, the ones that stay on the
So consistent. That's brilliant.
golden path will overcome evil in the end. Araki has repeatedly said that the main theme of JoJo is living with a positive outlook. It is a celebration of humanity. Those that reject humanity go against the very thesis statement of the work itself. The actions born from superficial evil, like the ones of Dio, Diavolo, Pucci, and many others, are actually the ones farthest from the golden path. And unlike the righteous actions of the protagonists, evil actions cannot escape annihilation at the hands of fate. Because they are evil, their defeat is simply inevitable. I hope that with this video you came to a greater understanding of the character of Dio, as well as his role in the larger JoJo series.
Really good.
As such an all-encompassing character, knowing Dio helps us know the truth behind many other things in the series, namely the idea of fate, and the force that drives our protagonist to do good. It also gives us a deeper understanding of the structure of JoJo's story, and in many ways gives us an intimate look at the thoughts and philosophy of the author. Most of all, I think Dio's path is the single biggest lesson JoJo tries to give us. Always try to embrace justice, and never reject the righteous actions that make you human. Dio Brando is absolutely one of my favorite JoJo characters, and of them all, I may even consider him the greatest that Araki has ever devised. I'm glad that I was able to not just share what makes Dio special in this video, but also come to brand new conclusions myself about the significance of the character, and the importance of each small part of JoJo that contributes to the themes that the character embodies. Beyond just Dio, the same could be said of all the antagonists Araki has created. In the future, I might also like to take a look at the others, and how each of them interacted with this concept in their own unique way.
Do it.
Until then, I'm happy to have covered the most important character in all of JoJo.
Hell yeah. Love that. That was really cool. That was really a good look at Dio, man. Yeah. There's more to it than just what you straight see. Like, I like how we had like what happened in part 6, and then reference to part 5 moments, you know, literally quoting the same kind of stuff. It's cool. And yeah, Dio's presence is constantly felt throughout the series, even though he's not there. I loved that. It's like, I remember me and my ex watched part 5, and I'd be like, was it part 5? Golden Wind. Yeah, part 5. And it was like, part of it was the conversation we had was like, well, what was the point of Dio being like, think he's dad? And then it's like, well, he just is there, and it's interesting and then to have this to point out, yeah, it's what would happen if Dio didn't have the same kind of perspective, and yeah, with Jono. That's cool. I love Hamon Beat videos on JoJo's. But anyway, thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video I upload, link in the description to the Patreon page. $1 more for our support channel is greatly appreciated. Thank you for that. And thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe, and leave comments below. Let me know what I should watch, some future videos. I'll see you guys, all you guys, next time. Bye.